Well, we haven't had any animals for a while, have we? And I know that some of you are missing that. So I thought this evening I'd give you the treat. Can you see that there? Just in the middle. Not a stick insect this time. No, that, dear people, is a leaf insect. Aren't they cool? There's three of them in here. They're from the Philippines. Not these ones, obviously. They're bred in captivity, but originally they come from the Philippines. And they need to be kept in here away from the stick insects because they're such good leaf insects that the stick insects think they're leaves and they start to eat them. So I have to keep them in here for their own protection, which is a bit like the book of Nehemiah, which we're looking at today. You'll remember that the people of God returned from exile in 538, and the books of Ezra and Nehemiah come together and tell a similar story. Ezra, the story of the rebuilding of the temple; Nehemiah, the story of the rebuilding of the walls around Jerusalem. The people of God return in 538, but Ezra and Nehemiah come later. Ezra returns in 458, and Nehemiah a little bit after that in 445, I think it is, 444, somewhere around there. What's a year or two when it's 2,500 years ago? But they return after the exile has happened about 80 years before, and they're part of the wave of the most important people that come back. That's often how exile works. The most important people get taken into exile first, and they're the last to come back. Ezra is the story of the rebuilding of the temple, Nehemiah, the story of the rebuilding of the walls. And after the completion of each, there is a celebration. In Ezra, it's the Passover. In Nehemiah, it's the festival of booths, a reminder in the midst of this security that they live in vulnerability. This festival celebrated to remind them of their time in the wilderness. But if you get to the end of Ezra and the end of Nehemiah, it's pretty uncomfortable reading, actually. Because in this quest for re-establishing themselves, not just in bricks and mortar, but as a community, there's some pretty harsh actions taken to those from outside. For those who have returned to the land, if they're married to a foreigner, well, they're required to send away their foreign spouse. Those marriages are dissolved and the foreigners are kicked out. It's there at the end of Ezra and it's there at the end of Nehemiah, and it makes for uncomfortable reading. What's going on is the people of God are re-establishing themselves. They're small and they're vulnerable, so they decide that the only way to remain distinct is to be completely distinct, to be identifiable, to be pure, if you like. And that, of course, is one way of defining yourself, to be exclusive, to be very clear about who you are and who you're not, and to keep others at arm's length. You can either assimilate people or you can choose to eliminate people, to push people away from you. And the choice that's made at the end of Ezra and Nehemiah is to push away, to exclude rather than to welcome and to embrace, to enable other people to find their place in that territory. You can understand it. It's a bit like these stick insects. They needed, I said stick insects, didn't I? They're not stick insects, forgive me. They are leaf insects. It's a bit like these leaf insects. They need to be kept in here for their own security, for their own protection, because otherwise they're at risk. But actually, as well as keeping them safe, though they don't know it, this is also their prison, isn't it? It's one of the uncomfortable things about having any kind of pet, but particularly things like this. And that's why we try to make sure that they've got space and are well looked after. Their whole life depends on me and taking care of them. This gives them security, it keeps them safe, but it's also their prison. And there's a bit of a challenge there in Ezra and in Nehemiah. You've built the temple, God is at the heart of who you are. You've built the walls, they're high, they're keeping you safe and keeping other people out. But be careful, because those walls might just become your prison. Rather than giving you freedom and security, they may isolate you and trap you. And the vision of God's blessing was bigger than this, actually. It was always to bless a nation in order that they might be a people who would bless the other nations, so that all the peoples of the world could come in and share in that blessing. The walls are high. Are there doors? Can people come in? Can they also find freedom? And Ezra and Nehemiah both end with this uncomfortable narrative and with this question for the people of God as they continue down through the ages. How are you going to balance out security and identity against welcome and blessing? It's a fascinating question for us here in Great Britain in the 21st century, on the other side of the Atlantic in America. How are you going to balance out identity and a sense of self and be a people who bless, who welcome, and who enable others to find a home so that all might flourish? Uncomfortable questions, no easy answers. But Ezra and Nehemiah make sure that the questions remain on the table. They were questions then, they're questions now.